Welcome back to the Placeholder Podcast, everybody. I'm Caley Fretz. We're back from Belgium, from northern France. I'm back in my living room, back in Durango, Colorado. Joining me today, Kit Nicholson.
Hi. Hello.
Hello. And Jonny Long.
I'm back too.
Well, we got a fair amount to talk about because, well, we just wrapped up a big week of Cobbled Classics. We've wrapped up the entirety of the Cobbled Classics. We got the Ardennes coming up, but there's also just lots of little stories, I think, that are floating around that we wanted to talk about today. Because frankly, well, we talked a lot of Roubaix already. We talked a lot of Flanders already. We're going to leave the discussion of the Ardennes to probably till next week after Amstel. But we got lots of little stories to cover. Before we get into any of that, though, Jonny, Kit, what were your highlights of the last week?
Well, I mean, easy one. Just meeting everyone, spending some time with the gang. That was good fun. Getting very, very wet at Tour of Flanders. Getting a nice muddy hug from Tom Squeens was quite good fun to end the day. Get a taste of what they went through on the cobbles. Not really. That's way over exaggerating. But yeah, no, I think just spending some time with the gang in Belgium. I really liked Belgium. I've been there before, but I didn't really, remember how much I liked it. And I did very much.
It was really enjoyable to meet everybody. Obviously, for anybody who's been listening the last couple episodes, you'll know that we had most of the Escape Collective crew over there. We also had 26 escapees, 26 Escape Collective members over for the entire week, and meeting all those folks was awesome. Unfortunately, we had to skip out on dinner on Sunday night because we had to get to Amsterdam and get home, but got to go see everybody, raise a glass one more time. Just really lovely to get some time with folks that, like, a lot of them, I know their names from either the Discord, or I said the Discord on purpose for you, our friend Jace, or from the comment section, or, just be like emailing and whatever else, Twitter, X. This is really good to put some faces to the names that float around the escape world, so to speak. Jonny, what about you? What was your highlight last week?
While on one hand, I will feel bad for saying anything that Kit wasn't there for, which does feel bad. I will, and that was lots of fun. I did particularly enjoy the sort of collective insanity as we got towards Roubaix weekend inside the bus the van we were all traveling in, and when we had Ronan back driving, where every time, even though, long story short, because we need to get into the thing, but me and Ronan came to an agreement that I would support his desire to drive rentals again after some interesting driving, and I almost immediately regretted it. But what that does is it makes you grateful every time you complete a journey. Sort of like when you land like a flight.
Get a round of applause. I think that bus deserved a round of applause to get to arriving at the end of the week in itself. It was something to behold.
I texted this to all of you, but when we returned the van, this is a 9-passenger Fiat van that we had for the entire week. And when we picked it up, it was already just absolutely completely beat. The list of, like Sixt, the rental car company sends you a big list of everything that's wrong with it, right? So you can kind of confirm and be like, yeah, it's wrong. It's okay. I didn't do this. I didn't do this. I didn't do this. The list was like a page and a half long. It was basically the entirety of the car. And when I went to return it, the guy was basically like, I'm not even going to bother checking this because there's absolutely no way for me to determine what is a new injury and what is an old one. Wow. Yes, the van barely made it. Barely started, actually, at the hotel on Monday morning when we had to fly out. But anyway, we are waffling now. I want to get into some of the stuff from...
Let's do some more reflecting in Placeholders After Dark.
Yes. We'll talk a little bit more about the week and our experiences in the week and how great it was to see everybody in it, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get into some of the other smaller stories that popped up over the weekend. This was one that's been cropping up in my Instagram feed because there's video of it. And whenever there's video of something like this, it tends to do the rounds. But basically, Jonny, a woman threw a hat at Van der Poel in the middle of Roubaix. And this is not the first time that Mathieu Van der Poel has had things thrown at him, even this season. It seems to me that the fans are getting a little bit more ornery, a little bit less controlled. Do you get the same sense? And what's the rest of this story?
Definitely, but I think we'll get to that in a bit. This story, we weren't aware of it at the time. I think it took a while for it to come out because it was such a quick moment on television where Van der Poel's going down a cobbled sector. He's already on his own out front. And just like an innocuous looking woman is sort of standing there, and just as he passes, like throws like a cycling cap. So it's got like the thick brim on it. So it gives some weight to like if you actually throw it. And it sort of goes towards his like back wheel, which then if that gets caught up is kind of actually pretty dangerous. Like getting beer and like urine chucked on you is disgusting and wrong. But I would say throwing something to try and make a rider potentially crash is even worse. And then also it came out that apparently she's a Van der Poel fan. I don't know if that was like some weird fake thing. It probably is, because that wouldn't make any sense. But she's going to hand herself in apparently, because they keep on catching people who do this. So like the beer thrower from Flanders, they've managed to track that person down. And then obviously with the Oppie Omi thing from the Tour de France a few years ago, and she got caught. So the Roubaix hat thrower is apparently ready to hand herself in, which is weird.
Well, we see T-shirts and even bags get caught in wheels, and people have to stop and sort it out, or they cause crashes. And you quite often see dogs being usually very well handled by their owners at the side of the road, but there's always a little bit of a heart and mouth moment when you see anything that looks, wind blowing anything across the road, or people. Or flags that there was that incident with the flags with, I think, was it Calmejean or someone at the Tour last year or the year before in the wind, and the flags draped down into the road. And they, the bike has got lots of moving parts and it's very potentially dangerous. He was going quite fast as well.
I think what the sport and riders can put up with is the chaos of having fans at the roadside, because the pros and cons are sort of balanced out depending on who you ask and who's had what interactions. But I think where the limit is then individuals within that roadside fan base deliberately doing things to riders. Like if they're being an idiot and they've got their phone out, obviously it's really bad, and there have been really bad things that happen. But that like what's it called? That cost, the benefit cost analysis or whatever, has kind of been squared, and that if we lose it, then that's a lot of the sport and like what people like about it gone.
I don't know how much it does to actually sort of throw the book at this woman and give her a big fine or whatever. I don't know if that's actually an effective means of doing anything about this. I'm not sure we can do anything about this, to be perfectly honest, other than sort of cultural change stuff, right? Like I sort of come back to European football, for example, has in the past and still sometimes today has real problems with sort of fan violence and stuff like that. But a lot of that has sort of been solved, right? I think particularly in England, it's not anywhere near as bad as it used to be. And that required a real cultural shift. It's sort of the only way to fight back against sort of what feels to be a bit of a cultural shift toward less well-behaved fandom.
I think there has been a cultural shift that was definitely seen at last year's Tour de France, where we had like photographer friends of ours who spend all day on the course being like, the fans this year have been crazier than years before. They were into like graffitiing cars that go past, like rocking them from side to side. And then we saw that this year, not to jump ahead, in a bit we're going to talk about one of the Movistar vans at Paris-Roubaix getting out and having an altercation with fans. I think some like theories on what's happened. I think the racing has been really good over the past few years. I think more people generally you have more general fans coming along and getting involved in it. I think post-COVID, when people weren't able to go, they're more likely to want to go. And then I think also it's like a cheap holiday or a cheap day out, as sort of like people's incomes are squeezed. It's like, instead of going this place, that place, we can buy a crate of beers, head up a mountain, drink them all in the sun. And so you get people who aren't necessarily cycling fans, but fans of getting pissed with a reason to do it. That's a weird way to phrase it, but that's kind of that's the vibe you see on the mountain sometimes. Is there's people there who are kind of there for the tour or for the classics, but it's more about the day out than seeing the sport, which is fine. Just don't do dumb things.
We're going to take a quick break from your regularly scheduled programming here and bring you a segment that we actually recorded last week, sitting in a bar, actually outside a bar, in Kortrijk. It was Jonny and Iain and myself, and we've been playing around with this idea. They call it the Tangents Podcast. And it's basically it's stuff that we maybe don't have another place for, or stories that don't quite feel like they belong on a website, or just aren't quite right for a written medium, or even a podcast like Placeholders. So they're a bit weird, and they're a bit rambly, and maybe slightly unfocused, but I enjoyed the conversation, and we thought we'd drop a bit into this podcast just to give you a taste. And as we refine the idea, maybe you'll see a podcast like this show up in your podcast feed. Let's throw to last Thursday. Kortrijk, a square, warm sun, high winds, and a conversation about mascots.
So I like interviewing mascots.
You've carved out a niche.
I don't really do anything with a lot of the
exist.
interviews I do because I just I don't talk to people very often.
Just for archive purposes.
Well, you never know when you'll need it. So I saw some deer mascots for the European Championships. Went over and started talking to them, and I confirmed that they were...
Was it a start of Flanders?
Yeah, there were two.
Is that what those were?
There were two deer mascots wearing the European bands, just wandering around doing the sort of activation bullshit that they do.
Yeah.
There was a tall one and a small one. I asked the deer if they spoke English, and they agreed that they did.
They agreed. That's good.
So then the main spokes deer was the small one, and I asked...
Do you think they arranged that ahead of time?
What
If we get interviewed, who's answering?
Oh.
They probably have media training.
Do you think like your name on the accreditation system flashes up like code red, and they're like, we better actually learn our bullshit?
Well, the bullshit that I was asking them wasn't anything to do with their actual, like, what they were representing. I don't know to this day where the European Championships are.
They're in the Netherlands.
Are they?
It's worked on me, yeah.
That's good news for them.
Yeah.
So they're cross-border deer.
It's all the same. To quote Caley, it's all kind of the same, isn't it?
So I asked the deer what their deal was. I asked if it was hot in there, and they said it was. And it was quite a cold morning.
It was a cool morning, so lucky them.
Previously, I've interviewed the Skoda Lion at the Tour de France.
Yes.
And I think a bobcat, actually, called Felix.
And the man who got deflated and decommissioned at the end of every what's it called, like the humanoid mascot at the Tour de France with the yellow helmet and the lightning bolt.
Nasty little freak of a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who would then the costume would get deflated down and left crumpled in the pile on the floor as if.
So the Skoda deer, understandably, it was about 40 degrees. And that Skoda Lion, sorry. She told me, the mascot, her name was Fanny, told me that
I remember this.
It was very hot in there, and I believed her because it was very hot, and she was in a lion.
Yeah.
And we saw her extract herself from it afterwards backstage, and she looked like she was in distress. Meanwhile, the deer in Flanders seemed like they would actually enjoy being a mascot in that scenario because it was, I don't know, like 9 degrees or something.
Yeah. It's cold.
But she also said that it was very hot. Other than that, they are marketing interns.
Okay. So it's like a shit sandwich you have to eat to climb the greasy pole.
Yep. Although the Skoda ones are actually like proper marketing people. The Skoda Lion.
The Tour de France is slightly higher profile.
Yeah, I know, but I wasn't expecting like the brand manager for the Skoda Enyaq to be in it.
Yeah, you're almost. They're almost too famous.
Yeah, they went too high, and these guys went too low.
Follow-up question. If we were going to, for example, put an intern in a costume at the Tour de France this year, what would that costume be?
Well, you shouldn't say this because we are maybe planning on getting an intern in, and this may
help or hinder.
Dissuade them.
Yeah.
I think we need to go...
a life-size Iain Treloar costume?
No. Like more aggressively functional and abstract than that. So like the E on the escape logo.
Yes.
So just a big E with like arms and legs sticking out
like a hockey puck sort of situation.
I don't know what that'd see out of, but maybe like the dot in the middle of the round bit of the E.
Yeah.
Maybe that. And the other thing I talked about with the deer mascot was that it was pretty fucking odd that I was looking at them in the deer eyes instead of in the mouth of the deer, where their actual eyes were. And they agreed that.
And
that
they had to
was,
hold it up, didn't they? Because it was so
yeah,
heavy.
yeah. The deer head was so heavy that just occasionally I'd look over at the deer because they were standing at the end of the press shoot waiting to pose for a photo with Casper
Watching
Asgreen.
them.
And they just had to like prop their chins up of the deer costume so that it wasn't
Holy fuck.
like sliding off their head.
Back to the escape mascot. I think if that happened, it would mean that our company was too deeply American, and I would probably have to find something else. If that was like if it hadn't been a jokey suggestion, and it said like this will be really good for the brand, guys. This could work.
There's a very good Twitter account that I don't know if you follow, but I know I do, which is just pictures of mascots at football games,
Yes.
observing a minute's
Minute
silence.
silence for on Remembrance Sunday. It's really good. Because West Bromwich Albion, who
Hate
a team
them.
from the Midlands, Caley hates them. I'm supposed to hate them as well, but I like them a bit more after their shirt sponsor for a few seasons was a company called Ideal Boilers, and so the mascot was a boiler with arms and legs. And so the boiler was their arm around the players at the end of the line, drum bowed, to also remember our war dead. Sometimes there's even poppy mascots that also then observe the minute silence, which you think this is kind of overkill.
Do you remember the alligator, the EF alligator?
That's before my time, I think.
No, it's recent.
But
The crocodile.
Was it in
Alligator?
real life? I only ever saw it
Crocodile?
in cartoon form.
No, there's like an actual person running around in an alligator
I
costume.
never saw that. Have you seen that
I've never seen that.
Oh, come on. No?
at the tour?
Come on.
Come on.
Up your game.
Yeah, it's like Kelly's like, if you haven't covered that, that's a missed article there. Well, there's also a big hoo-ha in the UK. Speaking of football mascots, because Arsenal's mascot called Gunnosaurus was a 50-year-old man, and they tried to sack him at the start of COVID to save money. Meanwhile, they're paying the footballers millions of pounds a week, and he's on like 50k. Oh my god! No. Okay, why?
It's rounder and bigger than I thought. Argyle the crocodile.
I've never seen that. Was this only at like American?
I don't know
gravel
who they put
races
in
or
there.
something?
Matt Bowden put somebody in there.
Matt Bowden would never get in that costume.
No. Never in a million years.
I could see Kira or Johannes
I think
having a fun day out.
This must have been like pre-COVID now. Yeah, because here's a
I didn't go
photo
to a
of
bike race
Argyle with Taylor Finney.
before COVID, so I wouldn't have seen it. Oh, that kit's old. That's like 2016, 2018 maybe?
Yeah, but that's not that long ago, pre-COVID. Right?
You keep saying pre-COVID as that's a thing.
Yeah, like it splits the
yeah,
earth in my head.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
I thought you were suggesting that like Argyle the crocodile was like a super spreader or something, and he got banished.
The missing link from the transmission between bats and humans.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time for Johnny Shorts. Jonny Long, kick me off.
You shall go to the ball, said fairy godmother Patrick Lefevre, or should that be the ugly sister? As the Soudal Quickstep boss looks like he's going to give the green light for his Cinderella, Tim Merlier, to ride the upcoming Giro d'Italia.
Nothing is sacred anymore as Lenny Martinez crushes the little mouse that is the hope of French cycling fans by apparently agreeing to move to Bahrain Victorious next year for reportedly 4 times his current salary. According to RMC Sport, the Frenchman is currently on €200,000 a year, but has signed a 3-year deal worth $2.5 million with the Middle Eastern team.
That's wild.
It's mad.
While Lenny's bank account goes, there is good news over at the Giro d'Abruzzo, where Adam Yates is making his comeback following his horrible fall at the UAE Tour and resulting concussion.
Arkea B&B Hotels Florian Seneschal had to change bikes 4 times during Sunday's Paris-Roubaix and said the quiet thing out loud when he blamed Bianchi for the problems, saying there was a technical issue with the bikes. Clearly, Florian is not aware of how his pain gets buttered. That was Johnny's Shorts, the comeback episode.
Poor Bianchi. They just cannot catch a break right now.
They can't.
What else happened?
Yeah.
Well, they
just had a bunch of stuff. They had a broken handlebar.
There were several broken handlebars. They had two broken handlebars for one guy in one race last spring.
Yeah.
True. Okay.
Anyway, let's move on. We got there's a lot of safety oriented things in this particular episode, but we are, I should say, if you want like the tactical breakdown of Paris-Roubaix, head over to How the Race is Won. And Wheel Talk as well. Although they do a little bit less tactical breakdown and more sort of contextualizing, I think, of the bike race. So we try to hit some other stories here on Placeholders. One of those is something that cropped up last week, and it was sort of in between podcasts for us, so we haven't actually had a chance to talk about it yet, and I think it's quite interesting. In fact, I've got a story about 3/4 of the way written that I'll probably run this week sometime once I get to grab a couple more quotes and interviews for it. But basically, it's the safety story. Right? It's why is everyone falling down, and why is it so bad when they do fall down? And this is sort of off the back of that nasty, nasty crash in Basque Country, where you've got Jay Vine, and he's going to be in a neck brace for months. I think he's still in the hospital. Jonas Vingegaard with some pretty serious injuries. Roglic with some nasty injuries. Remco Evenepoel with a broken collarbone, among other things. Single crash that took out.
There were 11 abandons.
Yeah, 11 abandons. And it just feels like there's been a lot of crashes this season, and that not only have there been a lot of crashes, but the crashes are particularly bad when they happen. And there's a lot of just sort of anecdata around this, right? Like there isn't good, essentially like record keeping on crashes, for example. I'm sure actually we could do that. Like, so every major race at the end is a communique from the medical team. And you could essentially just collate that and have a decent data set, but nobody has done that. We certainly haven't done that.
They're trying to do that now. That's the safe R thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, so that's what I was going to get to.
Oh,
so what they're trying to...
Johnny and I were both having the same thought there, I think.
You segued for me. So historically, we've been basically just going off of, it feels like there's a lot of crashes now, right? And one of the things that the UCI has come out and said is we would like to actually start to try to measure this. We would like to do exactly what I just said, which is just take these race communiques and put it into a data set and be able to pull some actual information out. Well, Johnny, as I was attempting to segue there, and then you pre-segued my segue, can you re-segue my segue now and tell me a little bit more about this safer thing that I'm talking about, the UCI safer thing?
A segue gazumping to sort of lighten the mood from all the safety talk. This safe R thing, or safer, it's a terrible name, even if it's a good thing. I think part of the battle is they have branded it poorly.
Yes.
It's partly been cooked up by Richard Plugo, and he was the AIGCP. And he's sort of been saying about how
team organization.
Yeah, and he's been sort of saying how it hasn't happened quickly enough, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, the main thing they've started doing is sort of analysing the crashes and trying to figure out why they happened. So they highlight things like road furniture is not signalled well enough, or course design. But then they found that actually from their analysis that 50% of the crashes have been rider caused. And it feels like a wrong thing to do, to blame riders for crashes. But if that's the reality of it, then it's better to look at why that's happening and how to stop it rather than to avoid the problem.
Well, that's what Mathieu van der Poel said last week. So when this story sort of first popped up in the wake of the Basque Country crash, there was lots of folks posting and giving quotes, and it was also right before all the press conferences for Paris-Roubaix. And so a lot of big name riders got asked these safety questions, including Van der Poel. And he was one of a couple different riders who basically said it's mostly us. Actually, he kind of highlighted a couple different things. I think one of the big ones is that there's fewer like easy kilometers anymore, right? It's just it's raced the whole time, and that's sort of a post-COVID thing. And if you just sort of look at, if you have like a certain sort of crashes per kilometer kind of metric, and even if that hasn't changed very much, they're actually kind of racing more kilometers than they were before. By that I mean, there was maybe 100K at the beginning of Flanders before. That was pretty chill. And so yes, technically they were racing, but the likelihood of crashes was maybe lower because they weren't fighting for position, et cetera, et cetera. And that has really changed. Sort of post-COVID world, the racing post-COVID really changed. Many riders have said this, and so we end up with a situation where there's just more opportunity to crash, basically. And then, I mean, this is something that riders have been saying for a decade or longer, really, which is that the incoming generations, quote unquote, don't have the respect that they used to have. Peter Sagan has said this. But it does seem to have, maybe if not merit, then at least like there's some underlying truth there somewhere, which is that the sport is changing to be more aggressive.
Well, I think also rather than the younger generation having less respect, there's just that there are these guys with teams engaged in the arms race to find the next best thing. You're getting younger and younger guys who can just put out insane watts per kilo has been dropped into World Tour pelotons before they've necessarily sort of raced up the pyramid of levels of races. So if you're an incredible athlete and then you're dropped into a hard race, like a technical race, it's way more likely you're going to crash. And then if you crash, it's more likely you crash others. The onus at the minute isn't necessarily on guys who are insane bike handlers or have had the years to afford them the experience that they can now just race alongside the best. It's more of whether they can sort of physiologically deliver a result, because it's become all like results based, right? Even more so, like teams are desperate for wins and results. So I think that probably plays a part.
And we don't have the young chaps whose job it is just to go back to cars and grab bottles.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have 2 years of apprenticeship essentially, and now they just come in order to win races. It's not universally the case, obviously, but there is a difference in hierarchy, and I imagine a very, very big difference in pressure. For the older riders too, who if they're in a contract year, they've got a much bigger market to compete against, because they've got all these agents looking for the next big thing. And if you're over 30, you're on the way to the pasture.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real answer. So the question is, why are there more crashes, and or why are they worse when they happen? And the real answer is all these things, right? It's course design, it's technology, which is allowing them to essentially ride faster all the time. Training, nutrition, which does the same thing. Kind of cultural shifts within the peloton. All these things kind of combining into, just into a scenario where there certainly seem to be more crashes. And again, I'm sort of awaiting the actual decent data on this. I think that will be interesting to see. There seem to be more crashes, and they do seem to be worse. And then it gets sort of amplified when you have something like you had last week, which is just kind of by dumb luck, a bunch of big names going down all at the same time, right? Like that particular corner. Yeah, sounds like maybe there was sort of some heaving in the road from roots underneath. Yeah, and so basically, like if you're not expecting that, you lose the front wheel,
or you get launched into space.
Yeah, which is basically what happened. And maybe that's a course design thing. Like maybe somebody should be standing on the apex of that corner and saying, "Don't ride here where the roots are. Ride on the outside of the corner, or slow down, or something like that."
Or fill that concrete gully with straw. I mean,
or whatever you got to do, right? So maybe that's a course design issue. And I think each one of these crashes, you could probably point at something slightly different or some combination of these things. For me, if you go to like sort of look at a risk matrix, right? It's going to be, you're trying to solve two things. You're trying to solve the frequency problem. And that to me feels a lot like this sort of cultural issues and course design. And then you're also trying to solve the severity problem, where the crashes that happen are really, really bad. And that's where a couple of the things that were said last week, including by, I think it was like Valentin Madouas was talking about this, and Thierry Gouvenou, who's the sort of course designer for ASO. So he does Roubaix and he does the Tour de France, among others. They were pointing at essentially the speeds being a lot higher, right? I mean, we've just had yet another record-breaking Cobbled Classic season, and it feels like every single race that we do these days is faster than ever. And part of that is because, again, like I said earlier, they're going faster the whole time, but part of that is because they're more aerodynamic, they're better trained, and they're eating better, and all these other things that are making the race faster. And if you're trying to solve the crash severity problem, it feels like that's the side that you have to pay attention to. And I don't really know what the solution to that is, other than like attempting to roll back a bunch of the marginal gains that have happened in the last 10 years, which is something that, I'd like to have Ronan on to discuss maybe in more depth, because I'm sure he would push back quite vehemently. But like, just you could make some relatively simple changes that would slow the peloton down. For example, and some of this stuff has already happened, right? The elimination of the puppy paws, the elimination of the sort of super tuck where you sit in your top tube on the way down the mountain, right? Stuff that sort of just keeps the top speed lower. You could just set a minimum width for handlebars, right? Like we just wandered around the pits last weekend, and there are riders riding Paris-Roubaix on 36 centimeter handlebars, right? Like full-grown 6'2" individuals with 36
now
centimeter
you're nearly
handlebars.
identifying.
Like, I don't care. I've ridden those. Like, there's a reason why mountain bikers run 75 centimeter handlebars, 80 centimeter handlebars. You have better control with a wider bar. This is not an arguable point. It doesn't help. So not only does it not improve control, it hinders control. It also just makes the whole peloton faster. Again, if you're looking at sort of rolling back these marginal gains, if you're trying to make the peloton slower, if you're trying to make the average speed drop back down 5K an hour, if you're trying to make the top speeds drop even further, because if we're talking aerodynamics here, an increase in aerodynamics, both from the bikes, the wheels, kit, etc., that could be 5 or 10 kilometers an hour coming down an Alpine pass, which is massive, right? 5 or 10K an hour is massive. Do you start doing like downhill racing did, where they banned skin suits, or some of these other things that again would just sort of roll these marginal gains back? I'm not saying this is the solution. I'm saying that if that is determined to be one of the issues here, if the severity problem can be solved with just lower speeds, there are ways to lower speeds in bike racing. Motor racing does this all the time, right? Like a lot of motor racing the regulations around motor racing are actually designed to make the cars slower. And then people optimize within those rules. And I wonder if, pro cycling needs to sort of pull itself back a little bit. But I don't know. I mostly come back to, I think that this question is essentially, there's a multi-part answer. You can't do any one thing and solve it, but you could maybe do 10 or 15 different things and make an impact.
I think the Basque country crash, which brought down Vingegaard, Evenepoel, Roglic, could have the best chance of actually really doing something, because what that crash has done is damaged the product of cycling and the Tour de France.
Yep.
Because we're now going to have almost certainly not a worse race, but a less pure race that's only the guys on the start line, and that's the story. And once you start messing with people's money, that's when things get changed, rather than any sort of political will.
So the other side of this, like I said, is this sort of rider culture thing, right? And I think that's a much more difficult problem to solve. But the other thing that was sort of proposed recently is the red card and yellow card thing. So Christian Prudhomme recently, basically, who's the Tour de France director, recently came out in favor of this, right, Johnny?
Yeah, it was. It's sort of designed to be given to riders for their conduct during races, because there's ways you can race dangerously and safely, right? And within a peloton, there's a bunch of commissaires, I guess you call them, that are like on motorbikes. Would you call them commissaires? That's the word, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, who are like referees. It's like having all those pinstripe guys on an NFL field, like watching what everyone's doing and who's out of line. So I don't know how exact. I guess like yellow, red cards comes from European football, where like a bad foul or a series of smaller fouls is a yellow card, and it's like, right, if that's your warning, you can now get another one, then you're sent off. Or like rugby, it has like a sin bin effect. You can't really sin bin in a race, but it would work.
It's an advantage.
It could work in like a Grand Tour, for instance, because like suspending a rider for a stage, for instance, while that would be weird with the result sheet, that could really impact a team, especially if they're a GC team. And then that sort of pressure would then influence behavior.
Yeah, and you could run them throughout the entire race, right? So you only get 2 yellow cards for the whole race, which means you could just get kicked out of the race entirely.
Yeah.
I think the hard thing about that would just be identifying those moments, right? Like, how do you do that? It's maybe easier in sort of like sprint finishes and things like that, where you've got a camera on the key area at all times. But a lot of sketchy stuff that happens in bike races doesn't happen anywhere near the front. So it would be a very difficult thing to actually police.
It's also consistency in those moments because, I mean, like we saw at the Tour of Flanders and Michael Matthews' disqualification, there was talk of, I think it was Matthew Heyman, who said, okay, this is fine. This is an in-race incident. They decided what they decided, and we'll accept it. But they need to be consistent. There was talk of what if Van der Poel, just out of a brief moment of weakness, either put his wrists on his bars or rode off-road rode on the pavement, like Marlon Russa did, and who got disqualified. She wasn't off the front, but these moments that you can't imagine. We'd hope that they would be consistent and they would do something about it. It might have made it a more interesting race, but there's got to be consistency, and we've seen that before so many times. And it takes me back to the Sagan incident. Was it in 2017 when he complained to the same effect? I think he was probably more in the wrong than Michael Matthews was in the moment, but getting disqualified from the whole race, he deemed as being a little bit overkill. So yeah, consistency, and that's almost impossible to quantify because, like you say, there's not a camera on everyone at all times. What
about the onboard cameras? Could we use them?
Well, it's still not everywhere, are they?
But like, you know how like the whole world has basically been turned into like a surveillance state with everyone having these ring cameras, so you like no one can do anything ever again. Why not just make it the peloton?
Be like an elimination race on the track where everyone's got a little red LED on their handlebars, and if they've done something wrong, they get a flash in their face.
I mean, just like in football, soccer, if the ref misses something, you don't get the card, right? Yeah. And I think that's how that's how it would be in cycling, where if the commissaires miss something, then you're fine, but they might get you next time, and they might get you when you do something worse. And I think that having a sort of one of my primary issues with the way that sort of punishments are doled out at the moment is it's always in hindsight. It's always after the race has happened, and so that the individual that's done it generally can continue racing. Or even some like Josh Charlie got yanked out for a sticky bottle, a Roubaix on Sunday, for example. So they do yank riders sometimes, but for this particular sort of type of incident, caused a crash or something like that. It's generally, as long as everyone's not injured, you just keep racing, and then maybe something happens after the race. This would be an opportunity to, kind of in real time, like, could you have VAR for pro cycling where there's just like there's a commissaire not in a car on a motorcycle, but just watching on TV and saying like, well, that was stupid. You just I think the perfect example is, remember that rider at Flanders last year who came up the outside,
the Bahrain guy,
and jumped back in. Yeah. It was a young rider and like kind of jumped back in accidentally, basically like hit a big hole in the grass and got launched into the peloton. That is an egregious example, but that sort of thing happens regularly, and you could just boink, yellow card. Like, you have a yellow card, and you just tell them over the radio. And
there were a couple of Soudal Quickstep riders who were doing it in exactly the same place and ducked in just before. I mean, it was a drier day, so there was no massive hole full of water that concealed in the grass. But there were, I recognised the part of the road, and there were a couple of Quickstep riders moving up and ducked in just at the right point. Is there not something? I think we've talked about VAR or VAR, as I just worked out you said before. I feel like there's something to that, something about that that's already happening in a way. Or maybe it's just a better appeal process, a better kind of judgment process.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Counterpoint. Counterpoint. Don't do any of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't do any of it.
Okay. Cancel bike racing.
Don't do yellow cards. Don't do yellow cards. Don't do red cards.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not desperate for it.
Take care of itself. So here's how it has worked over the decades, right? It's like, if you do something dumb, and in particular, if you do something dumb and you're not a big name rider, you are just never allowed to go where you want to go in the peloton ever again.
Like
right? It's a self-policing thing. I'm not saying that is a better solution. I'm just saying that like it's not like the peloton has been unpoliced for its entirety. It has a system of policing. And if you ask anybody who shows up from a smaller team, for example, Sam Boardman, who does the rookie reports for us on the site, right? He's talked a bit about this, how, if you're not on a World Tour team, you don't get to ride at the front. You don't get to ride where you want to ride because you get elbowed straight back to where where they think you belong. And so there is a fair amount of that where if you do something really dumb or you're a rider that is quite dangerous, you can get you can kind of get like moved into an area where you're less dangerous to the rest of them. The exception is I can't even tell you how many riders have told me that Peter Sagan is very dangerous to ride near because he doesn't fall down. He's an exceptional bike handler, but everyone around him falls down on a regular basis because he's just sort of like all over the place. He can do things that other riders can't do. And, obviously like you're not going to elbow Peter Sagan out of the front. That's when you get to that level of rider, then that's where the sort of self-policing breaks down.
You reminded me of one story, which it may or may not be true, but there was a rider who used to always attack and get in breaks at the Tour. And then one day he had the misfortune of attacking just as Chris Froome was taking a nature break. And from that day until Chris Froome didn't ride the Tour de France, he was never allowed again to like get himself in the break. And then you saw as soon as Froome wasn't at the Tour, magically just back in the break and attacking off the front. So that whole thing does work. My thought after that is the point where we like cross the Rubicon or whatever, when those sort of unwritten rules where you don't attack while people are having a piss break or whatever, like when those sorts of rules start to get chipped away at, is that when it's just like lawless and back to being even more of a Wild West than it is now? I don't know, because like now there is still some sort of self-correcting thing, even if everyone is racing more dangerously, I guess. But I don't know, it's a weird one, isn't it?
I don't know. I just sitting here thinking we're going to be writing about appeals a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's what really matters, how much work we have to do on a daily basis.
It's just not that interesting, is it? It's like X, but I mean,
that's what football media became for a while.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut across you, but that's what it became. Like it was everything was about like match of the day, the highlight show every week was just about this decision, VAR, and it is not good for the product in quote marks. We have a pretty good one at the minute. The problem is we just had a bunch of riders this year who are really good all fall down and get injuries. I don't know.
Maybe we could learn something from rugby here. So if somebody gets a red card, they have there's a period of so if it's a dangerous high tackle, which it usually is for a red card, for instance, then they then go into a sort of almost like naughty speeding school for car driving in this country anyway. So they have to undergo a little bit of re-education, but they also have to have a kind of tribunal thing. So there were a couple of instances in the Rugby World Cup last year when there were some fairly overdone red cards that were then, so usually you'd then find yourself banned from a couple of matches, and that quite often gets overturned. And it's the same with, if you get yellow carded in a rugby match now for doing something like that, it has a chance of being upgraded to a red card for the time that the VAR spends to look at they have 10 minutes to see if it's bad enough to get a red card, and then there are implications following that. It's not just the rest of that match. There's a period of time following the match when you might be banned from a few matches, or you might have to go to naughty school, or you might or it might be overturned and you might be fined to return to training.
So like one said, if you like cause a crash or you ride dangerously, you have to spend a day descending behind Ilna Zakarin, or in a car
park like going around cones.
Yeah, or like you have to listen to Jens Vogt on a motorbike just for the entirety of your 6-hour training ride.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I love being
Jens.
Interviewed by him intermittently.
Yeah, I love Jens. He's a good guy, but he's
very shouty. He's very shouty.
He is quite shouty.
I had to like kind of run away from an interview he was doing at the end of Roubaix on Sunday. I was like shouting in my ear. All right, I think we've waffled on about safety enough here. Not something we're going to solve at the moment, but yeah, I think again for me that it comes back to, okay, if you've got this risk matrix, you've got frequency, you've got severity, what can you do to chip away at either one? And what cultural changes can you try to make? What, do red or yellow cards help those cultural changes along? What technical changes can you make? Can you slow cycling down? Can you make cycling 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers an hour slower, on average? Yeah, you can actually. You quite easily can with technical solutions. Mandate minimum tire sizes, so everyone's got like big old honking like grip surface underneath. I'm just chucking stuff out here. I do want to have that conversation in particular with Ronan, because Ronan will come back and say absolutely not, and I will come back and say ban skin suits and ban stupid narrow handlebars. And you've just dropped 3K an hour off of every single bike race the entire year, right? Those 2 changes right there. But Ronan will obviously have different opinions, and he's not here right now to defend himself. No. So maybe now is when we should come down and say this is exactly what should happen. This is the official placeholders position. When
we've had the next record-breaking one-day race, we can get Ronan on, and he can talk Jonny and I to sleep. And
but it'll just be the next one. Every single one is a record-breaking race now.
I mean, next week.
It'll be a new record-breaking podcast segment from Ronan where he'll monologue for half an hour. So we're pushing boundaries everywhere.
Yeah, another instance where he can't defend himself. Sorry, Ronan.
All right. Real quick before we get to Escape After Dark, obviously we have Brabant's Appeal tomorrow, which is very exciting. That's a great race. Really like that one. Then we have Amstel Gold this weekend, followed by Flèche Wallonne, and on into the rest of the Ardennes. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm excited about these races as I was about the Cobbled Classics, but they're still good watches, and I will. Yeah, we'll break them down. We'll break them down as they go through.
I'll be watching. I'll watch them.
Yeah. It is technically our jobs to watch them.
It's certainly mine on the weekend.
And then we'll get to the Giro. Guys, the Giro's not that far away.
God.
Do you guys realize that?
Yeah.
Which Wout van Aert may or may not be at.
It's 10.5 weeks until the Tour. The Aussies might as well have not flown home.
Right? I got home last night. 2 small children. My wife was just like, you're never leaving again.
Oh, no. Okay. Your end of Tour Dad to Real Dad.
Yeah, Tour Dad to Real Dad. Just the immediate swap. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening this week. As always, check out all the rest of the Escape Collective podcast. There was another episode of Jack Haig's new podcast, The Rest Day, that dropped on Monday. Make sure you go check that one out. He chats with Pavel Sivakov about, switching from Ineos to UAE and what it's like to ride for Tadej Pogacar, which is it's a great little chat.
All right. I'm sitting here with Pavel Sivakov. We're back in Andorra. It's about a week and a half after World Catalunya. I wanted to do this a little bit earlier, but you were actually racing GP Indurain, which was the weekend after Catalunya.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
How'd that go?
Actually, pretty well. I mean, we won the race with the team with Brandon. And yeah, for me personally, also, like in Catalonia, I was suffering the whole week, to be honest. And there in Indurain, I was like towards the front in the back end of the race. So it was a nice feeling to be back in front, really. And yeah, happy. So yeah, looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, I think both of us weren't really enjoying Catalonia that much. We were together a little bit, but went too far back.
I think like it's a race you really enjoy if you're in good nick, but yeah, we were not in our normal shape, and I think we suffered quite a lot. Although it was still a nice week, to be honest, especially for me, like won the race.
Yeah.
Keep an ear out for those every other week. And then, of course, we've got How the Race Is Won and Wheel Talk and Geek Warning all coming up this week, as always. And we will be back next Wednesday, to talk about the beginning of the Ardennes.
Is Mathieu van der Poel's next big victory?
Yeah, whatever Van der Poel wins next. By the way, I'm just going to refer to this entire next block of racing as the Ardennes. Are we okay with that?
Yes. Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay. I know there's technically some of them are not in the Ardennes, but
it's the Ardennes.
Yeah. We're going to refer them as a group. They're very similar. in the roughly the same part of the world as the Ardennes. Anyway, let's head to Escape After Dark. Members, hang out, and you'll hear, you maybe get some additional stories from our trip to Belgium last week. Spicy thoughts, spicy takes. All the spicy stuff ends up in Escape After Dark these days. So make sure you sign up, escapecollective.com/join, and we'll see you next week.